Hi, I'm Lynn Stone. Thank you for joining me, and also thank you to Patton for once again inviting me to their literacy symposium. I'm absolutely thrilled to be here. I'm sorry that this is a recording, but as luck would have it, the time that I was scheduled to appear, I had to be on a plane from Heathrow to Dubai, and I don't trust the Wi-Fi on the plane for obvious reasons. So you will be getting a recording instead. I'm always around and able to be emailed if you have any specific questions that haven't been answered by the good people at Patton. But for now, let's go on to our presentation. Today, I'm going to be talking about something called the four-step process. And the subtitle of the four-step process is Making Words Stick. It's my job, as I see it, to help children to place robust mental orthographic images of words into their long-term memory. And I have specific ways, and my staff have specific ways of doing that at the Lifelong Literacy Clinic that we have in Melbourne. So over the years, that's distilled to a four-step process, if you like. We take 4 steps to help children to remember words, because that's our point. And I don't just mean remember words for reading, but also for spelling. The runway to being able to fluently write words without really thinking about them, to have that automatic recall so that your cognitive real estate can be taken up by thinking of the great ideas that you have or thinking about what you learn. We want to make that a really strong automatic process. And so these 4 steps are about enhancing that. It's a framework towards that. So I'd like to share that with you. It starts with the question, how do good spellers remember words? And if you're a good speller, have a think about it. How did you get all of those words into your memory? Was it the word wall in grade 4? Right? Was it the flashcards? It's none of those things. You had to, well, basically, you had the ability to orthographically map words very quickly and very efficiently. But even the irregular words that we have as good spellers, because I'm a good speller as well, and I've thought about this often, the words that I've found that I didn't automatically remember after 1 or 2 exposures, I had techniques. I adopted techniques to make sure that those words could be instantly and effortlessly recalled from long-term memory as well. And everybody's got different techniques. So we'll start with that. So what we want to do is basically teach any speller, any person who's got an emerging lexicon, who's still building that store of words that they can automatically retrieve from memory. We want to help them mimic what good spellers do. So it starts with this question, how do good spellers remember words? Well, if we can agree that balanced literacy and whole language teaches poor reading, we also need to look at some approaches to teaching spelling that teach poor spelling. Firstly, English is a complex orthography, and teaching a complex orthography as if it's transparent teaches poor spelling. So I'll just say that again. We have a complex orthography, and I'll show you the ways in which it's complex. And if we ignore that and teach that as if it's transparent by saying that every letter sequence is a sound, that actually teaches the habit of poor spellers. English spelling has other layers, not just sound to symbol. Sound to symbol is a great starting point. And when you teach sound to symbol, and I'm talking about phonics as a foundational skill, not only do you enhance children's phonological awareness, but you give them a very, very good starting point, a very good foundation for the rest of the orthography. So let it be said here and now, I'm a huge fan of phonics, and I would definitely recommend that for any school, any system, any district, to have a good synthetic, systematic phonics approach. So that's fine, but English has underlying morphemic layers. It is also driven by morphemes. The orthography selects letter sequences based on the morphemes of the language, and those are the structural and meaningful sublexical units that we have in words. For instance, this is becoming very, very well known and everybody accepts it. There are rules, there are reasons why we would double a final consonant when adding a specific type of suffix. Do you know about this rule? So if the final consonant is in a construction, like let's say the word big, if that construction goes consonant, vowel, consonant letter, and you add a suffix that begins with a vowel, like ER, to make the new word bigger, then by just the addition of that morpheme, you're going to have another G after the first G in big. So it's going to be B-I-G-G-E-R. So English spelling has morphemic layers. It's driven by the type of morphemes that interact with one another. English spelling has underlying etymological layers. That's why we have homophones spelled differently in writing. So you have words that sound the same. What the orthography attempts to do is to make them spelled differently. So we don't spell the word "you're" or the words, the homophones "you're" the same way. We don't spell there, and there. You know the theirs I'm talking about? We don't spell them the same because the etymology of each one of those words drives which letter sequence we have. English spelling has operational rules, and those rules are inextricable from the morphemes and the etymological layers that we have in words. We have other rules such as the letter CK. That's a grapheme, and we select that grapheme in specific places. This is what I mean by operational rules. Can you have CK at the beginning of a word? No, right? So English spelling has operational rules, whether you like it or not, whether you call them something else or not, there are rules. So morphemes, etymological layers, and rules. That's what makes it complex. It's not a simple one-to-one, sound to symbol orthography. The solution is to embrace that. I'm going to take my pen here and just get rid of that word because that's a remainder from an old slide. The solution is to embrace that. If we embrace that right from the beginning of teaching children to read and write, we stand a better chance and we have a longer time to show children how to master the morphemic, etymological, and operational layers of English as well. Teaching 150 to 200 spellings for sounds, I'm afraid, is not embracing that. So have a look at your phonics scope and sequence. How many different units do you have to teach over the lifetime of that sequence? If it's 150 to 200, then what's happening is that sequence is not embracing etymology, morphology, and operational rules, and I would question it. The result of teaching 150 to 200 spellings is casualties, and we're seeing casualties at Lifelong Literacy and in the wider world. I travel all over the world and work with schools and see children who are not progressing in the ways that we want them to progress. And one of the things that I've seen creeping in to the mistakes that they're making is that they are spelling words just like they sound to that child rather than integrating the morphemes, the etymology, and the operational rules. Good spellers also use mnemonics. So this word mnemonics, it's a really interesting word because I've heard lots of people call it mnemonics, as if it's got something to do with pneumonia. And I've even seen very well-trained people spell this word mnemonics with a PN. Have you seen that? This is a completely different base. This is to do with air and lungs and breathing. Can you see what words this might be in, right? Mnemonics, however, is a Greek-derived word, M-N-E. And that part there is to do with the mind and memory. So How do I know this? Well, this MNE in mnemonics also surfaces in amnesia. Yep, the absence of memory. So mnemonics are the techniques to assist in the retention and retrieval of information in long-term memory. Good spellers use those. MNE. The thing is, in the word mnemonics, the M here is silent because in English, and here's an operational rule of the system, in English, we are not allowed to have the sound at the beginning of a word. That's one of the constraints. All languages have constraints, which means they have borders, parameters, rules to keep the language from being a massive random splash of sounds and symbols and so on. So we have rules. One of those rules in English, and I didn't make this up, I didn't make the rules, I just provide frameworks in order to communicate about the rules to children while they build their lexicon. So we're not allowed at the beginning of a word. Therefore, what we do in speech, even though in spelling we preserve this sequence because this sequence is a whole sequence that has meaning, we will select the consonant closest to the vowel. That gives us connected phonation, right? Mnemonics. Do you see how that works? So we won't make this one silent, the N here, and say mnemonics because this isn't close to the vowel. That's why we do it, right? But when it's not at the beginning of a word anymore, the comes back. Amnesia. So if you're teaching, for instance, as part of your phonics scope and sequence, the advanced code or the complex code that strives to explain the MN sequence in a word like mnemonics as being a spelling for the sound N, how do you explain amnesia? If MN being a spelling for the sound N is true, then you would have to say amnesia, but you clearly don't. What we have here is etymology and morphology working together to produce letter sequences in English. And the entire language is full of that. So you might as well embrace it. For novices, let's go on to mnemonics themselves, though. For novices, sound symbol correspondences are great mnemonics. So let's take the alphabet and we will teach children in a systematic way with the most useful sequence first, you know, like Satpin, that's the Carnine sequence, or something following the principles of the Carnine sequence. That's a really good idea. We can get them to start to blend symbols as they say them into speech sounds and blend them together into words, right? That's a brilliant idea. Systematic synthetic phonics, it's really logical. So for novices, these are good mnemonics, sound symbol correspondences. But once the alphabet's taken care of, orthography, morphology, and etymology all provide mnemonics too. To help with that, then, what we've developed over time at Lifelong Literacy is something called the four-step process. We take words that we're going to study and we look at their definition, their structure, family, and then we have practice structures around those words. Practice is often not talked about during word study sessions that I see online these days. We have to get students to practice these words. There's no point in studying the word once and moving on. Practice is really important. So we'll do lots of work on that. We'll talk about the different forms of words too. So when we look at the definition of a word and we do each step in depth, we're talking about its semantic form. So that is the way that it appears in the universe and gives us meaning. So the semantic form is whatever is activated in the mind in relation to that word. So if I say dog, a very small child, a very young child might think, oh, that's a thing that goes with, you know, and then an older child, oh, well, that's a thing that goes with, and they wag their tails to show happiness and, you know, other facts about dogs, other things that are associated with dogs. And if you say dog to a vet, well, that's a canine quadruped and so on. So the semantic form changes over time. And that's what in Scarborough's reading rope, for instance, and the simple view of reading, that's what is meant by increasingly strategic language comprehension processes. We expand our semantic forms as we go along. That's increasingly strategic. There's also the structure of the word, though. So when we study words, we need to look at their orthographic morphemic form. What are the morphemes in here? If there's more than one morpheme. Some words can just be a whole morpheme, like the word tiger, right? The word tiger may look like a base tig and a suffix er, because that suffix er has two denotations. It means more, or it means one who does, right? So the er on the end of tiger may at first look like it's a suffix, but think about it. Is a tiger one who tigs? Is a tiger more tig than something? No, the er is on there for etymological reasons. It's a whole morpheme. There is no separating the two syllables in the word tiger into anything more meaningful. Tiger is tiger. That's what it means. So anyway, we look at that systematically as well. So the orthographic morphemic form. Words have kin. Words are not orphans. They have relations. They have ancestors, they have cousins, and so on. This is what we mean by family. And when we study a word's family in relation to a word that we're looking at, we either look at the form, the feature, or the function of the word, and sometimes all of those things. So I'll go over the form, feature, function part when we get into family. And lastly, of course, there's practice. We want retrieval efficiency. So we want children to place those words into long-term memory so that they can efficiently retrieve them without having to spend too much cognitive time on those words. And how do we do that? We create good practice structures. We make sure that we review. We make sure that we teach children to pay attention to the difficult parts in the words. The other thing is, when you're selecting a word for the four-step process, make sure that you don't select something that they could sound out with basic grapheme phoneme correspondences. That's a waste of time as well. The words that we select in the four-step process are words that may not normally be derived from what they already know about the writing system. It's words that are difficult to put into long-term memory. So we're talking about irregular words. We're talking about big, complex words. We're talking about words that you may have observed over and over again in your experience as words that children often make errors on. So save your time and make sure with the four-step process, if you're using this process, that you're studying words that are difficult for them to arrive at independently of you. Does that make sense? There's no point in studying regular words. You're wasting your time. And regular can mean all sorts of different things, right? Depending on what your students know. Every word can be explained. Every word has an explanation. Every word has a family that it belongs to. And sooner or later, depending on how efficient your initial teaching and learning has been, sooner or later, you see that and you get to lift the lid on the whole system. So don't waste your time on regular words. Hope I've made that clear. All right. Now, what we do is we give students a worksheet for every word that they're studying. This worksheet can be photocopied and distributed over and over, and they put those worksheets into a book. There is a permanence about this word study that is really important. It brings me on to a point as well that I've been concerned about while I've been traveling and working in schools around the world. And one of the things that I've noticed is the rise of the mini whiteboard. So I've been seeing lots of really good review work on mini whiteboards, but sometimes, you picture the classroom where children are either sitting at a desk, which is ideal, or sitting on the floor, which is not ideal at all. Are you sitting on the floor right now? When you go to a PD and you're there all day, do you choose the floor or do you choose a desk to sit at when you've got to write down and concentrate, right? Think about it. Floor work, not the greatest thing, right? Anyway, that's my 2 pennies worth. So what I've noticed with mini whiteboards as well is that sometimes an entire lesson can take place where children are writing on mini whiteboards and then rubbing out their work. Now, what that says to children is that their work is impermanent, their work is something that they can't review, their work is not really important. And I'd like to mount an argument for getting children back to writing words with pencils on paper, right? I know it sounds obvious, doesn't it? Writing with pencils on paper so that they can, over the course of a year, not only look back on their progress, but they can look back and add to what they've been working on. There's a permanence. And the four-step process, the sheets within there are built for that. They're built for permanent, high-quality work. So this is the worksheet. It's an A4 page, and it gives them space to work on the different forms of words and to track their practice. So this is a way of tracking how many practice sessions they've done on that word and on that word's family. If you do some counting here, it's actually a lovely idea as well in terms of how many exposures to words children get. Traditionally, when you're trying to get a child to spell a word, I've seen lots of approaches that say, okay, just write the word out a lot, or color the word in, or stare at the word, or write the word over and over again. The four-step process gives children repetition of their words, but always focusing on a different form. I'll show you what I mean. Up here in this box is the handwriting box. The importance of neat, legible, rapid handwriting cannot be overstated. It's the basis of writing fluency, neat, legible handwriting. So this is the place where they get to form their letters carefully with strict guidelines and to get that practice, that slow motor practice in forming their words to help warm them up for when they're using those words in their fluent written work. So you've got a dot here and an unbroken line here. That unbroken line is called the bottom line. So we have meta language for all the different parts of the lines that children work on, all of the different segments. We also have meta language for the line segments that form written letters, but we're not doing a full handwriting workshop right now. However, this is called the bottom line, and all letters sit on that bottom line. Short letters like A and C and E go up to this middle line, and that middle line is dotted just as a guide. So the letter A, for instance, will go up to, but not above, the middle line, and it will sit on the bottom line. Now, you'll have to forgive my PowerPoint script there. Writing on PowerPoint is never incredibly neat, but I hope you get the point. When I'm writing this on a board for children, I try to make it as neat as I possibly can. Because here's the other thing. Children watching you write is the same to writing development as hearing you read is to reading development. We need to give children lots of opportunities to see adults handwriting. Again, it stands to reason. And we've got, we're living in the world of the PowerPoint now, where everything is fully made and we're flashing whole words at children or cartoons that are drawing letters on pages. Children need to see you write. Use the four-step process lessons as an opportunity for the children to see you form from scratch all of the words that you're going to study together. Anyway, back to handwriting. So we've got the bottom line, the middle line, and then there were tall letters like the letter T. And that goes nearly, but not touching, this top line of the box. And we have a horizontal line in the direction that we write. See how that works? So you can model that and get children to concentrate on their handwriting here. In box one, we have the meaning section. And there's a dragon looking the word up in the dictionary. This is the year of the dragon, but we will continue to use dragons beyond that year. So there's a dragon looking up a word in the dictionary. In here, we will write a sentence. We won't necessarily write the definition of the word. We'll write a sentence that shows we understand the definition of the word. So take this word at, for instance, and by the way, I don't recommend that you use the word at in the 4-step process. This is just for demo purposes only. Why don't I recommend you put at in the 4-step process? Because you can sound that out. Any kid who's got their SATPIN and they've mastered the formation and transcription of the SATPIN will know how to spell at. Why are you spending time on this? Don't do that, right? But let's say we've got this word at. In fact, I'll choose a different word, right? Check this out. Let's be really, really strict with what we're doing in this 4-step process. I'm going to erase that. Instead, I'm going to write this word, which comes up an awful lot. And it is was. Again, function word. When we say it in speech, it often sounds like this, was, right? So how do you sound that out? How do you get children to identify the sound symbol correspondences? Well, it's just not as simple as cat or sat or so on. Anyway, in the meaning box, you can have something like, it was a sticking, basically with SATPIN, you need W in there as well, though, and the W is the regular part, so teach it soon. It was a pin, right? Rather than was means is in the past tense, blah, 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 right? So there is a meaning sentence. When you look at the structure of that word, and by the way, in the structure box, you always rewrite the word. But the other thing about it is, how many times have you written was now? Yeah, the children that you're working with have written was 3 times already, and each time concentrating on a different form. So your choices are, if you want children to remember the word was, you can get them to write was over and over again like this, without saying anything, by just using their visual memory, which we all know has got very little to do with recall of words. And by the time they've written that the 3rd time, they're not even thinking about that word anymore. That is some sticks. The Bart Simpson paradox, where Bart Simpson, at the beginning of the episode, every episode of The Simpsons, has to write out some lines, vampire is not a career choice, or whatever it is that he has to write. And by the 2nd line, he's not thinking about that anymore. It's not going in. Saturation. Whereas if we get students to, satiation, I should say, when we get students to write words and think about their different forms, they pay attention. We're engaging them every time and getting repeated exposure to the word. So the word was, well, basically in a heart approach, a heart word approach, which is a half step to placing words, I think, into long-term memory. Students might draw a love heart, which, by the way, is extremely difficult from a motor perspective to draw. Even for me on a PowerPoint, it's hard. So they could say, this isn't very regular, this isn't very regular. It's a half step. It's all right. Heart words, not too bad. The students we work with, we want them to show why. We want them to think about and talk about what we have going on here. First of all, W before the letter A often has an effect on that letter A. Not always. Look at this word. So there's a family where it has an effect, and there's a family where it doesn't. So if we've got this word, a dog will wag its tail. Yep, that's not in the family. But there are lots of words that are in this family, and it's called the W effect. If I took away that W, just to prove my point, if I took away that W, and put a different, oh, I don't even have to put a different letter in, do I? It reverts to as, but with the W there, it becomes was. The W effect happens for lots and lots of words. So we show bossy letters. We show how one word affects another by putting in an arrow like that. Then we need to think about other words that are in this word's family. Words in isolation is never a very memorable thing. We need mnemonics. We need techniques to assist memory. So we've got was, along with, and here's the family now, want. That's a very common word, and it also shows the W effect. By the way, I'm not doing any heart stuff on the S. The letter S represents the sound Z as much, if not more, than the letter S represents the sound S. So when you teach the letter S, you should at the very beginning be saying it's S or Z, or the noisy one, Z, S, Z. That stops them spelling it with a Z. Hits the nail on the head very, very quickly. When we have words in a family, we will also indicate the relationships, that the feature of this family with our marking system too. So we've got want and perhaps wash. Now, with a family, be very, very careful. When you put words into a word family, that is not an exhibition for you as the teacher to try and think of all the words in the entire language that do this. You need to think of good examples that are within the zone of what the children are going to be encountering and needing to use. You don't go crazy and put hundreds of words in this family. Good examples that can be used straight away will actually lead to memory and application to words that they haven't seen before, to unfamiliar words. We want to give them enough of a roadmap, but we don't need to show them the entire universe at once. Does that make sense? I've underlined the S and the H, by the way, in wash to show that these two letters go together to make one sound. And that's another thing that we do in our marking. We'll underline digraphs and trigraphs. So now we've got a good family here. To practice that, what we're going to do is we're going to go over the word, the target word, and the words in the family. So that's 3 words we're practicing, not one in isolation with no kin, right? Not orphans, but words that have their relationships. So we go like this. For the word was, this is how we do it at Lifelong Literacy. How you do it is up to you, but what we want is retrieval efficiency. So we can either say the letter names, W-A-S, was, but in this word particularly, what we choose usually is to go w, a, s, was, w, a, nt, want, w, a, sh, wash. And we say the default phonemes that go with those graphemes for this particular set of words, because when children are studying this word, they usually are still at the very beginning of their literacy development, and they'll have their default phoneme grapheme correspondences, and they're still practicing those as well. So this actually helps them to practice those correspondences. W, a, s, was, or we can go w, a, z, set for variability, was. What I don't want is to teach children that the letter A is a spelling now for the sound O. Right? I don't want to teach them that. I don't want that to be something on their code chart that they have to randomly select from. It's about location and it's about relationships with other letters. That's what orthography is. So we teach them that, and we try to stick to a very small set of grapheme phoneme correspondences. So to reiterate, when we do a definition, we're talking about a word being useful if you know what it means and putting words into sentences. That's our definition. That's our semantic form. As you can see, definitions do well in sentences. So when you've done step 1, you've either given them the definition or you've modeled that word in a sentence for copying or dictation, or differentiation, or more advanced students, you have them generate a sentence to show you understanding. So this is scaffolded this part. But by the time you finish step one, you'll have generated a sentence, a high quality sentence with a capital and a full stop. It's always a sentence. The thing about these sentences is that you can go back to them. So whiteboard sentences you can't go back to. You need to generate this sentence on a piece of paper. So build high quality sentences on one topic if possible, so that they can be recycled for dictation, for fluency practice, to use as sentence fragments later on. Build rather than erase, right? If you were going to choose from these words, would you choose a definition sentence or a usage sentence? Remember, content words and function words have different behavior. When you're writing sentences, try to compose relevant sentences, not mini narratives. So, the ferocious bear and so on. That's not the point. We're not in text generation. We're in transcription. We're in mechanics with this. So compose relevant sentences, not mini narratives. A bear is a mammal. Do you know what I mean? They're much more relevant. And make sure you can come back to them and recycle them. So they've got to be good quality. Choose your material carefully. We don't want mini narratives. Next, though, just to reiterate, structure. So when we looked at we answered the question, what do we need to pay attention to here? And how are we going to show that we did that? And for us, we have a marking system. And I have a Jim Jam Gang episode called Marking Like a Boss that you can see on my YouTube channel. How to remember tricky word parts. We underline letters that go together to make one sound. So if we've got the words young and whale and fur, and by the way, I'm sticking to rabbits, tigers, bears, and mammals. This is my topic for these the examples that I have. Young, whale, fur. With young, you're going to underline the OU and the NG. With whale, the W and the H. With fur, the U and the R. Cross like a boss. So silent letters like in monotreme, lamb, and pterodactyl. Where are you going to place the crosses? Well, in the word monotreme, it's the E at the end of the word. In lamb, it's B. We don't say these sounds. It doesn't mean that MB or PT are spellings for a sound. It's just that we stop sounding before the cross, right? Cross like a boss. Show the bossy letters. In the words provide and warm and large, what are the letters that are having an effect on the other letters? Well, in provide, the E is doing that. If I took away the E, it would be provid. With warm, if I took off the W and put an H, that would revert to the R sound, harm. But with warm, we've got the W effect. Oh, and I crossed the E there as well. With large, the E is making the G say J. And see, I've underlined, it's fine, the A, R, and warm. Show the oddballs. Sometimes there are letters that you can basically say, this is a piece of code that you have to learn, or you can show that within the context of this word, it's not doing what we expect. The words to and many and does have examples of oddballs. So what we do is we underline the oddballs twice, rather than saying the letter O is now a piece of code that you have to remember for the sound oo. When we show oddballs like that, we make sure we put them into families. So to, do, who, shoe, prove, lose, canoe. There's not many, right? Bringing us on to the word many and any. The A is not code for e. It's just that any and many, it's being odd. And same with the O in does. Also, syllables have meaning. So when you get to longer words, so when we're out of the territory of was and of and that sort of thing, we can get into this really weird sort of dark place called syllable types. And syllable types are neither graphemes nor phonemes nor morphemes. They're not sort of accepted linguistic units. They're ways, again, a syllable type approach is a framework that has limited use for decoding, but certainly doesn't have a lot of use for spelling. And I'm not saying encoding. Encoding is just sound to symbol transcription. That's not spelling. We're talking about spelling right now. Syllables have meaning. So if we took the words platypus and carnivore and animal, we could try to divide those words into syllable types, or we could divide it into platy, meaning flat, and pus, meaning feet. It's a flat-footed animal. Carnivore, we can divide that into carny plus vor. Carny, meat, flesh, vor, to do with eating. So that's where we get voracious from. Do you see how we don't obsessively have to break everything into one syllable units? Same with animal. Anim means breath or life. So if you animate something, you breathe life into it. If you are unanimous, you say it with one voice, one breath. Do you see how that's much more? Syllables have meaning. Let's go for those. And that, of course, takes us right into morphology. When we look at the family that words are in, we have to answer this question. Which other words should we study in connection with this word? And your focus drives the family. So we've got all of these different forms of words, but we want retrieval efficiency. So your choice of family is going to help with that. If the word that you're studying is to do with meaning and vocab, like say the word nation, you want children to understand what a nation is, then you're going to be focusing on the function of that word and the semantic form. If a spelling pattern is your focus or a morpheme is your focus, you're going to be focusing on words or selecting words to do with the orthographic or morphemic form of the word. So the word was, that was an orthographic family that we looked at. The word was has very little semantically to do with want and wash. Do you see how that works? So depending on what your focus is, what other words that you want to study in connection this word with that word, that's what drives the family. So look at nation. If we are talking about nation as a vocabulary word that children want to learn, and that's the focus that you have, then you would use words like country, land, and realm, and you'd show the nuanced differences between the meanings of those words. Whereas if you're looking at the morpheme nate to do with being born, then you can have words like native, innate, and natural. Or if this letter sequence TION, which occurs in more than 3,000 words in English, is your focus, then you may want to put other words with that letter sequence in there, always looking at the fact that the T is part of the base and the ION is the suffix. Don't do them all at once. Remember cognitive load. What is your theory here? Sorry, what is your focus here? The last step is practice. How do we get a return on our investment? Because when you've done all of this work, you've invested time and energy, and we want a return, a good return. How do you get children to practice? Well, remember what I said about satiation? So if you say the word platypus over and over and over and over again, for instance, by about the 5th or 10th or 20th time, that word has lost all its meaning. The brain says, oh, platypus, oh, I like those, Australia, blah, 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 right? By the 10th time, your brain's going, oh, I'm fed up. I'm not paying attention to this anymore. That's called semantic satiation. Now, we can do that with writing as well. Your brain gets fed up. When you write something over and over again to try and remember it, you hit the Bart Simpson paradox. And I just coined that. There's no such thing. There's no research on the Bart Simpson paradox, but you know what happens. You get satiated. When you write words over and over again, the mechanics of doing that can occupy your working memory to too large an extent for you to place the word in long-term memory. Also, writing isn't brief enough to get good practice at volume. So this is my argument against writing words over and over and over again. You need good practice at volume. Oral exercise, saying the words out loud, first for spelling, then for reading, that solves all of these problems. It solves all of these problems. Your brain getting fed up, the mechanics occupying your working memory, and the brevity that you need. Oral exercise. So we use mnemonics again. With the word lamb, for spelling, we'll go l-a-m-b. We'll say the silent bit, then we put it back together for reading, lamb. Segment, blend. It's lovely. Platypus. Platy is our meaningful unit, so we're going to split it there. Pus. So rather than make schwa vowels when we're pronouncing syllables, we schwa nothing. We show that we need to remember that it's a U here, not an A, an E, an I, or an O. Platy, pus, platypus. Mouse, ow, s, e, mouse. So we say the silent letters for spelling, and then we put it back together for reading. That's some high quality practice right there. So if you were going to choose a word to use for your 4-step process, what I'm going to get you to do, and this is something that you can do for homework, is you can choose from young, and I've got a solution for young there, and that's on your handout. Or you can choose animal, and again, the solution is on your handout, so don't look at it until you've done it. Or platypus, and there's a solution as well. It's time to sum up, though. With the 4-step process, these are the points that if you're using it, and I encourage you to use it, these are the points that I want you to remember. When you're studying a word, use the marking system to draw attention to salient parts, the parts that are difficult to remember, the parts that have the most use and also are part of the family. Model the process at all time. You write it out. Don't project already made 4-step processes. We do have 4-step process type ready-made kits, but they're for you, not for the students. Model you going through this process. Figure out the best procedure in terms of practice with your students together. So maybe it is WAS was, maybe it's WAS was, right? Figure it out with your students. It's usually one of the two. And be clear about your practice expectations. Make sure that in your lesson planning, you're planning for review at good intervals so that children know that they're going to be asked to reproduce those words at predictable intervals. Make sure that and you expect them to practice independently or with a teacher aide or with somebody to get those words into long-term memory. And establish a quiz routine as well. So not only do you put your target words and family words into daily routines and daily review, but also having a quiz routine where you will say and warn children, and this is where whiteboard work does really well, where you'll say to children, all right, we're going to warm up. I'm going to take the words from the family was. You ready? Could be anything. Ready? 1, 2, 3, was, right? Also, though, the last thing that I want to make really clear is that if you link your work and your word study to the big picture, that is the knowledge building units that you're using with your students, you're going to get better bang for your buck, because environmentally and in terms of engagement, they're going to have more exposure to words that are part of their knowledge building work. So, for instance, if CK, right, is in your scope and sequence, and you're trying to get children to remember that the letters CK can only come at the beginning. Can't come at the beginning of a word. Then you could choose words like thick and back. But if you're studying birds, for instance, in the big picture, you might want to just tweak the family words that you're studying, and do things like stick and chick, right? They make nests out of sticks and they have chicks and so on. Do you see how that works? Link your word to the big picture, your work to the big picture. And that's the 4-step process in a nutshell. We're developing resources to do with that all the time. And I'm very, very happy to answer any questions that you have. I do hope that this has been enlightening, and I want to thank Patton again for including me. So sorry about the absence this time. I'm sorry to actually miss the symposium, but it's been wonderful working with you, and I hope to see you again. Take care.